Everyone hits a bump in the road. What do you do with it? Be inspired as we explore the ways people experience, navigate, and manage the ups and downs and twists and turns in this road trip called life. Welcome to another episode of Bump in the Road. The basic podcast is always free. We also have a premium subscription called Bump 2 that lets you listen in on extended behind-the-scenes conversations with our guests. Check it out at www.bumpintheroad.us. If you ever thought that Indiana Jones was fiction, this story might just change your mind. This is the third installment of the ultimate summer adventure, and it's all true. It's a story of one PhD student on a quest for the meaning of life. Why are we here? What are we meant to do? Ageless questions for which each generation and each individual must seek their own answers. The next step of Wendy's journey is guided by the mysterious and elusive Juan Flores, her contact and guide in La Paz, Bolivia. With very specific instructions from Juan, Wendy sets off to find the Devil's Bell, a rock somewhere in the Bolivian Altiplano near Lake Titicaca. The rock rings like a brass bell, she is told, and offers the portal to the next stage of her quest.
So I wanted to do a quick recap of why on earth I was on this crazy journey in the first place. And primarily what this was really about. I mean, there was a lot of things it was about, but primarily I had done the Course in Miracles for 2 years. The Course in Miracles states over and over again that everybody's entitled to hear guidance. It's our birthright to be able to hear guidance and to be able to be led through this very confusing labyrinth of life to a much happier place. And of course, that coincided enormously with my love of, Peter Pan and Neverland and all these stories all over the earth of this better place we could be at. But the difference with the Course in Miracles was it was saying, you don't have to die to get there. And you don't have to do 1,001 prostrations, and you don't have to spend hours in meditation. You have to just remember who you actually really are. And I'm sure we'll get into that a little bit more. But so the journey so far, I left California, just sort of jumped out thinking, all right, the only way I'm ever going to learn how to hear guidance is by jumping into the void, if you will, into the unknown. Okay, God, what should I do now that I've left everything I knew and owned and everything in California? What next? So the journey led to New Mexico first, where we met Satnam Singh, who was a Sikh and very high in the Sikh order. And he told us about this book, Secret of the Andes, all about the monastery of the Seven Rays, where the famed Incan sun disk was housed. And it was in Bolivia, and the only way you could find it was by searching for it. And if you were a matched frequency for this monastery, you could enter it. Now, he also gave us the name of someone in La Paz who would lead us part way into the monastery. And another thing that was in the book was that this beautiful, incredible place was in the Altiplano. I don't think it specified Bolivia, but we started there. And the Altiplano is a 12,000-foot huge plateau where you can be on it and look for hundreds of miles and see absolutely nothing. And there are cracks in the middle of this Altiplano that you couldn't see from a distance because it's a sudden searing crack. And that crack goes down to about 8,000 feet, and we're very near the equator at this point. So everything that can ever be grown is in this beautiful valley, often called the Valley of the Flowers. And these aren't just, typical Catholic monks or anything like that. In this monastery, there are wise beings, super, super evolved, highly evolved beings, and living a life of total peace. And all of that appealed to me so enormously. And what also appealed to me was finding answers to my questions. I was burning with the questions of why are we here? What are we supposed to be doing here? how do we get out of here? Um, and all the different religions were saying different things. And I really, really wanted to know. And so our journey had taken us so far. Well, mine so far at that point had gone from New Mexico to Hawaii to Samoa. And I had the kids at that point, and they decided in Samoa they wanted to go back to normalcy. So they were with their father in New Mexico, and I went on to Tahiti, Bora Bora, Tahiti, and then Easter Island, and then Chile, and finally now with this episode, we are in La Paz, Bolivia. Now, La Paz itself actually is a yunga. It is a deep crack in the middle of the Altiplano that drops to about, it drops to about 12,000 feet. And it is this very, very narrow little valley that is a city. And the sides of the cliff sides are very, very steep on either side. And La Paz is a very strange town, or was in the 1980s in the first place, because the poverty was phenomenal. We were hoping to get all our hiking equipment and everything and warm clothes all in La Paz, but there was nothing in La Paz to be purchased, especially not food. So we were extremely ill prepared with food or anything. Meanwhile, while we're trying to look for stuff in La Paz, we're waiting to get in touch with Juan Flores, the man who can take us partway into the monastery. And this was super important to me. I was just fretting unbelievably. Was I pure enough? Was I good enough? Had I done it right? Was I hearing guidance at all? I mean, all the way in this journey, I was like, is this right? Am I right? How do I know? And we'd had some very challenging experiences. Oh, by the way, the boyfriend that I had gotten together with in Hawaii joined me in Samoa, so was on this journey with me. Really wanted a high adventure. I was Raiders of the Lost Ark all the way. That's what I wanted so deeply, was spiritual adventure. And boy, the gods sort of got together and went, "Okay, girl, we're gonna give you the time of your life." And everything from entering La Paz on was highlighted, was theatrical, was dramatic, absurdly so. And the stories I'm going to tell will show you this in glaring detail. So it's ages before we can get in touch with Juan Flores, and we're dealing with the difficulties of La Paz, where it's the equivalent of November in the mountains of the Rocky Mountains, and there was no heating anywhere. Never got warm. But finally, we actually go to the address that we have on this teeny little tattered card from Satnam Singh, and he actually comes to the door. And he's a young man, maybe in his 30s, and sort of the typical Bolivian bowl cut haircut, very, very bright and cheerful looking. Satnam Singh had said he was a very evolved being, that he had come to one of his yoga classes, and it was clear he knew way more than Satnam Singh. And so anyway, Satnam Singh had actually tried to find the monastery also, and had not succeeded. And I can't remember. I think Juan said he had taken a camera, and Satnam Singh said he hadn't taken a camera. So that was a little confusing. But Juan Flores says, "Well, I'll be in touch with you in a week or so, and I'll tell you where to meet me." And it takes forever. It wasn't a week or so. It was longer. But he gives us an address, and he says we're supposed to meet him around 7:00 at night. And as I said, that it gets very steep the moment you leave the flat valley floor, and any sense of normalcy ends as you begin to climb up, and very, very fast. And so it's dark. We can barely see the numbers on the buildings. We're walking up this super spooky street in the first place. No idea how we're actually going to find the building. And I think we passed by this sort of alcove where someone was in the shadows, and they step out and they tap on Gary's shoulder and say, "Follow me," in Spanish. And we enter this very dark building. Again, throughout the rest of this journey, there's almost no light. There's no electrical lights, very few in La Paz and none as we go up this steep, steep canyon. And so it's absolutely black inside this building. And there's super, super eerie, scary music playing, like really loud too. And I'm like, whoa, what is this? This is like a grade D sci-fi movie. What have I just entered? I was very scared. Gary was so brave and followed this man up a long flight of stairs. Meanwhile, the music's getting weirder and weirder and louder and louder. And finally, he opens this door and there's lights in there. And there's Juan amidst all this huge table of lights and gadgets and earphones. And Juan Flores is the local DJ, which of course kind of blew my entire idea of this super guru we were about to meet. So, okay, amidst all the loud music, which is always difficult for me to concentrate with music anyway, he then begins to proceed to tell us all the different rules and what we have to do and on and on. And some of these included not to worry about food, not to bring a ton of food, because our focus on the present and on flowers and on the sky and the clouds would nourish us. We didn't have to worry about food. Of course, we could take no camera, no compass, no electronic equipment whatsoever. No thoughts of the past. And at that point, he said, and you can't contact anyone from your past from this moment forward. And at that point, my mind really jammed badly, not just because of the loud music and the whole weird situation, but Bess, my daughter. And I had gotten in the habit of, mentally being with her a great deal. And especially at night, I'd tuck her in and kiss her goodnight and tell stories and talk to her. This was all in my imagination, but I knew it was getting to her in some way. And suddenly Juan is saying, I have to stop that if I want to succeed to get to the monastery. I remember really well how bad that collided in my mind. But I couldn't, he was speaking fast in a combination of Spanish and English. I didn't understand a ton of Spanish. Who knows how many of these directions I got correctly? Gary was just sitting there. He didn't have enough Spanish to really contribute much. So he said, he went on and on about Orion, the constellation Orion. I think he even took us to the window and gazed upon it and like, that's it, that's everything. Just keep your focus on Orion. That's where we come from. I can't really, who knows what he really said about Orion, because I wasn't catching everything. But he said, but this is important that you look at the constellation Orion, because in order to find your way to the Monastery of the Seven Rays, you have to find, first of all, the Devil's Bell. The Devil's Bell. That gave me pause, of course. The Devil's Bell was actually a rock, according to Juan, that rung just like a brass bell. And we were to find that rock and ring it. And he said, from that moment forward, you will never be the same. You will be a completely changed person. And then if you're attuned to the monastery, the sound of the bell will be identical to the sound of the Incan sun disk in the monastery. And you have to follow the sound. And okay, I thought, we could do this, no problem. He told us the name of the town. It was called Ancoraimes along the shores of Lake Titicaca. And he said, he was very specific. He said, you had to go to a certain place in La Paz where transport came in, and said, you have to take a truck. Do not take a bus. Take a truck. Okay. And the reason he was so into the whole Orion thing was that the rocks around the special Devil's Bell were in the shape of Orion. So we know that was the devil's bell. He said to wait for a dream to tell us when to go. And okay, so that was basically all of his instructions, being very, very focused on the present. If our minds wandered, we would not make it. And I actually remember leaving that meeting being high as a kite, thinking, oh my God, it actually exists. My guidance has been correct. It's led me to this amazing man. We're getting directions part way. How can we fail? I was floating. That did not last long, did not last long at all, because I went into more severe doubt, because every morning we'd wake up, did you have a dream? No. Did you have a dream? No. And not getting that dream was really, really like stressing me like crazy, because La Paz was stressing me. The cold was stressing me. It was only going to get colder. And so I decided, Wendy, if you can hear guidance at all, wouldn't guidance tell you when to leave? And do you have to really wait for a dream? I couldn't really figure that out. And certainly it suited my purposes to believe the former. And so that's what happened. We decided, okay, this is it. We're going to do this. And so we go at like 4 o'clock in the morning to this place where there's transport. And seriously, the temperatures were easily freezing and below. And on our very long walk across much of La Paz, we were stepping over bodies the entire way, bodies that were sleeping and had cardboard under them and cardboard over them. And that's it. And it was really a terrifying scene. And it just strengthened my desire to find the monastery and somehow bring my daughter in with me someday and give her a decent life that was not filled with all this garbage that our present day world was filling most of us with. And so we get to this transport area, and literally we wait most of the day, at least 5 or 6 hours, where trucks came over and over and over again. Now, these trucks were flatbed trucks with high sides, big flatbed trucks with high sides, and they were packed to the gills. There was no room. I watched people actually dive into them, and I thought, where are they going to? Everybody was standing. There was no room to sit down. People were clinging to the sides of the bus. And after about 10 of these went by, I just thought, this is impossible. I can't cling to the side of a bus for several hours. And I mean, the side of a truck. And so we decided to take a bus. Now, this doesn't seem like a big deal, but to me it did, because twice already, I hadn't followed Juan's directions. And I was already beginning to go, oh my God, I'm already failing, which of course had been a major theme of the journey so far. So we get to Ancoraimes, which is an extremely beautiful tiny little village on the lakes of Lake Titicaca. And it's a beautiful sort of agricultural scene with wheat waving in the fields and people cutting down the wheat with a scythe, and super beautiful. We camped out there for several days, and I was determined to find the Devil's Bell on our own, because I thought it was kind of cheating to ask. And all the people that we did talk to said that any rocks in the area that used to ring no longer rang. They all knew that there were rocks that used to ring, but they didn't ring anymore, which I thought was very strange. Finally, Gary gets impatient with the whole thing, and me, and just simply asks somebody, where's the Devil's Bell? And somebody goes, oh, I'll show you. And so in fact, he takes us to this, sort of freestanding sort of monolith type of rock. And I look around and I can't even imagine Orion's shape or anything, but I was like, oh, well, if this rock rings, maybe this is it. And so Gary and I have this unbelievably ridiculous argument about the best way to ring the bell, and, the ritual and how to do it and all of that. And finally, we sort of kneel down. Each of us takes a rock, and strikes the devil's bell. And lo and behold, it actually rang. I mean, really like a huge brass bell, loud, clear, beautiful. It was amazing. And I waited for the, enormous changes to happen in my psyche and, all of that, but none of which happened. But I sit really quietly and wait for the sound, to follow. Now, mind you, where we're sitting, we're completely ringed, not completely, maybe 2/3 by 24,000-foot mountains. So Lake Titicaca was kind of flat, and then all of a sudden, choo, these huge mountains rose. And there was nothing to do but just go, okay, here we go. And maybe this is the direction. And we strike out into the depths of the Andes and climbed and climbed and climbed and climbed for days, really. To this day, I really don't know how long we were up there. I completely lost track of time. It might have been, I have no idea. And what we discovered up there was a very, very interesting sort of timeline as we were sort of at the edge of the mountains. There was a certain way the people were, and as we got deeper and deeper into the mountains, of course, things got quite different. Now, the first stage was extreme poverty. No matter which stage we were in, we were extreme poverty. There was almost no food in any of the little shops from any of these little tiny villages. So we'd go into one of these shops and find onions, I think was mostly what was there, and huge 5-gallon tins of alcohol. The whole stores would be filled with alcohol, and it showed. These towns that had vehicular access, which meant mostly buses, there were no cars up there. Like for instance, we went into a village one time, a really tiny village. It was Good Friday. I'll never forget that. And the entire town was drunk. The entire town. I swear the horses were drunk even. And at first we created quite a fuss that we came into town at all. And it seemed like everybody was being really friendly. But then things got so strange. Like the teenagers were drunk too. And believe me, that's a scary situation because all the children, and there was probably 50 of them, started pressing in on us and pressing closer and closer. It was super scary. And then all the town honchos came out to inspect our papers. And that took about an hour and a half. We were never sure we would ever get out of there alive. And when we did, we sort of ran out of town as fast as we could. All the kids were following us. And we didn't know what they were doing. We knew they were messing with us in some way. We finally get off and to go to camp and pitch our tent and whatever, and found out they had spit all over the back of our backpacks. And then they started throwing rocks at our tent, at which point I thought we were doomed if they cut our tent or hurt our tent in any way. It was almost dark at this point. Very scary situation. And at some point I stood up and said, "We're missionaries of the Lord Jesus Christ. It's Good Friday." I was really hoping their Catholicism would break through. And it did. It worked perfectly. So this happened a number of times. We started calling it the gringo runaround, and I got a very big dose of what it's like to be in a minority that is hated. And people would tell us the exact wrong directions often. Now, these are still towns that had vehicular access. Like one time we looked way far off in the distance. There was a big flat plain in front of us and saw this little village, and we wanted to get there. And some man came along and we asked which way to go. And he said, "Oh, just go straight across." Well, it turns out that was the worst possible way to go because it was a pure marsh. So we marched through this marsh for probably 7 hours. It was pure hell. And there was enormous amounts of walking in this little journey, and my mind was going completely batshit. I was full of fear all the time. I was going back and forth on, sort of trying not to think about anything other than the flowers that didn't exist. It was so cold up there and so flat. There wasn't a single tree anywhere. And we thought we were going to, we had only oatmeal and maybe a few almonds and some apricots with us. And we thought that um, we would be able to cook our food up there, which was totally impossible. That was part of our complete insanity and about not researching stuff ahead of time. Um, so it was bleak beyond thinking. And I was trying not to think about Bess, and I was missing her so badly. And then we entered a whole nother stage of, as we got deeper into the Andes, we found these tiny little villages that were not connected by buses. So it was all foot traffic. They were super kind people, like unbelievably kind. We'd find a bowl of warm potatoes with alpaca or llama cheese on top, just anonymously. Kindness, unbelievable. But not just kindness. There was this feeling of we were the first white people they had ever seen. And in one town, little village, they actually took me around to all the sick people in the village and asked me to heal them. And I couldn't say no. I said no a whole bunch of times, and they wouldn't take no for an answer. So that's what could I do? I did my best. I just would pray for the people, but it was so amazing. Another little village, the school teacher brought all the children out to meet us, and none of us spoke Spanish. They were Quechua, we were English, a little tiny bit of Spanish, but the warmth and kindness was amazing. From that, then those were really, really sweet times. But then we went even deeper into the Altiplano, and now all sense, the tiniest bit of normalcy completely um, disappeared. Um, like there was a time, this huge, vast field of white alpacas, which was very unusual, and we could see there was a shepherd, kind of very far away from us, and he had a huge white dog, and that dog started circling us with tighter and tighter and tighter circles. And I kept expecting the man to call off his dog, and he didn't. And that's when I learned a very, very important lesson that sounds so simple, but I'd heard this Sufi little phrase once about trust in God, but tie your camel. Or another rendition, trust in God, but carry a big stick. And I thought, either you trusted God or not. What's this big stick, tie your camel thing? Well, in this moment with this dog who was in his third or fourth circling of me, had now bumped against my leg. And that's when I picked up rocks. And that's when I learned that crazy dogs really don't like rocks. And I saved myself. And we were able to reach the shepherd, and he directed us, thank God, to wherever our next, what would you call it, shelter would be, because it was getting so cold that just the tent was not going to make it anymore. And we had to find shelter because the winds were unbelievable, and they were screaming. That was always fun for me. It was just like everything was screaming and blowing, and I was cold. We could not stop to rest for 1 second. And of course, I'm wondering, do I hear the sound or not? Because in high altitudes, so this is now sometimes easily 15, 16, 17,000 feet, places where literally I took one step, had to rest, take 2 steps, throw up nothing because we had no food. it was, and I had no idea how much I was risking my heart health at that point, but it was very, very, very high up. And so we're always trying to find shelter. And, in the midst of the Altiplano, which is so vast, it's impossible to guess which way you should go. And I'm there. Am I hearing? Is this the sound of high altitude? Is this the sound of the Incan sun disk? Meanwhile, Gary has been through this whole thing, incredibly supportive. And I'm like, here's this beautiful man actually trusting me with his life, basically. And I'm feeling the weight of his trust, especially this one day where I'm like, I don't know where to go. This must be easily 2 weeks into the journey. We're hungry, we're dirty, we're cold, and we have no concept which way to go. And I literally, this is the truth, I got down on my knees in the middle of the Altiplano, and I just was like, God, you have to help us right now. You have to. I don't know what to do. And I demanded it. And this is also true. Within under 3 minutes, suddenly we see this person on the horizon, this figure, quite far away, would take easily 15, 20 minutes to finally get to us. And as he draws near, I see that it's a man clothed totally in black, with a black hat, riding a black horse. The horse is so thin, he's careening in the wind. It's the absolute opposite of Don Quixote. And I'm like, oh my God, this is a vampire, and he is going to kill us. And he draws closer and closer, and he's so thin, and his face, his hollow eyes. And I'm like, okay. But one, I didn't care if I died that day. I really didn't. And two, I had given the call to God. And I was experienced enough at that point with this concept of God that I stood my ground and went, wait a minute, I know this doesn't look really good, but this must be a messenger from God. And lo and behold, it actually was. He actually gave us directions. He asked the dreaded question, do you have any food? And I had at that point, I think, 5 apricots left, and I gave him 3. And I did not end my beating myself up for not having given all to him. Somebody going to this monastery would have given everything to him, and I didn't. And, that was just the beginning of my list of all the things I'd done wrong on this trip already, especially as we're going into deeper and deeper bleakness. Now, mind you, we went all the way, even by the second phase of the journey, where the people were really kind, we were back at the Stone Age. Absolutely. And that's when I realized that all time on this planet exists. All history already exists in the present time. And these people had one digging tool. They had not invented things like a latrine, an outhouse, much less a hole in the ground. They still hadn't figured that out yet. They didn't know to wash wounds in the stream, things like that. So we follow the directions of the vampire and walk all day in these screaming winds and find nothing all day. It was just terrifying. And finally, we see way off in the distance this little cluster of adobe buildings. And I'm wondering, what on earth are those buildings doing there? There's no water, no trees, nothing but screaming winds. And I'm like, could there possibly be people there? And so we approach, and it's almost dark. It's getting near absolutely last light as we approach. And I'll never forget, a whole pack of starving dogs comes out to greet us, and just howling and chomping, like snapping at our ankles, and just so scary. Gary was so brave in that moment. I had my rocks. I had 2 handfuls of rocks, and dogs are very scared of rocks. Thank God. And we gradually entered this tiny little village that's built in the old Spanish style of having a central quadrangle and all the buildings clustered around it. And absolute silence. There was no one. It seemed like there was not a soul in this village because, of course, again, no lights at all. And it's getting really dark. Now, the end of the Course in Miracles, it was like 2 pages before the end of the text of the Course in Miracles goes, "This course is a beginning, not an end. You do not walk alone. God's angels hover near and all about you. And of this be certain, I will never leave you comfortless." That line actually was one of the major motivations for this trip. It's like, really? I mean, I was experimenting. There weren't a lot of teachers around in 1979 to teach me about the course, and none around that had huge amounts of experience with it. So I'm like, really? You're going to protect me? And I'm sure a lot of my, going into the wilderness was to find out, yeah, really? Really? You mean that? So I'm here in this absolutely almost pitch black quadrangle going, God, you promised me. I'm furious. And so almost as if a bell rung after this long, long time standing there with all the dogs screeching at us, all of a sudden, but very slowly, people come out of their houses. Now, these aren't just people. They're over 6 feet tall, maybe taller. They all have cloaks on with hoods on. They're all more or less the same size. They're all walking really slowly. And they come and they circle us. And I'm making ridiculous gestures about food, like touching my stomach and then my mouth. And then I'm like, Wendy, these are the poorest people on earth. What are you doing? And so we stand there absurdly. These people are absolutely silent. They don't gesture. They're not moving. They're not talking. The dogs are howling. The wind is screeching. I'm like, God, you promised me you wouldn't leave me comfortless. You promised. And at that point, Gary says, there's a little light over there. Why don't we go over there? So we leave this wonderful group of zombies and we go over to this little house. It seems to have a light. We knock on it. Boom, the door opens. There's this beautiful young man, cheerful, bright. Hi, come on in. I'm the school teacher. I'll take care of you. Yes, of course, you can spend the night here. I sat on his stone floor, which of course that building was also not heated, and just bawled my eyes out. I was just like, thank you, God. Oh, thank you, God. Thank you, God. Oh my God, saved again. And I've been saved many, many times on this journey, and this was yet another one. And the story goes on and on and on, and we're searching and we're searching and we're searching. I swear every hill we went over, I was like, I know it's on the other side. Now, I was also using my mind to think about nothing but the monastery. And I had created this incredibly vivid idea about what it was going to look like. Because at the time, and certainly today even, you create your own reality. You do it with your mind. If you really want something, you've got to really focus on it and think about it a lot. Well, that's what I was doing. And finally, we get directions to a town that was actually down towards a normal temperature. We weren't freezing our butts off. And just before we got there, I had this dream of these 2 peaks, these beautiful snow-capped peaks. And I knew that the monastery was, if we could get between those 2 peaks, we would find the land where the monastery lay. And, every once in a while, someone would say, oh, yeah, well, I've heard of the Valley of the Flowers. Yeah, but I'm not sure where it is. And so from that beautiful little town, we could see two beautiful snow peaks off in the distance. And I was it. This is it. This is it. This is where it's going to be. I know it is. And so we're part way towards those mountains. And Gary is getting incredibly frustrated with me. He had been for quite a while. And he actually starts saying he's not going to go any further. And by that time, I was so crazed that I said, okay, fine, give me the tent, give me, whatever I need. I'm going on by myself. Because, and this is a very important point in this story, there were two basic paradigms that were conflicting in my mind. There were thousands, but really one that was very, very potent. And one was, oddly, sort of Sleeping Beauty, where the night that's successful in waking Sleeping Beauty was successful because he didn't give up. He kept hacking through those brambles until he finally found her. His great strength was not giving up. But in Hawaii, back in the first episode, I'd gotten very, very lost in the jungle and had to use what I thought was guidance in order to get me out, and did get out successfully. And at the end of it, I heard what I thought was the first real piece of guidance I had ever heard. One that I thought was, yeah, this is true. It felt so strong and so real. And basically was, when the way is hard, it's not the way. When the way is hard, it's not the way. And this way was hard, and I knew it. And I thought, which is true? And I didn't want to give up. And I told Gary, no, Gary, I know it's just over those peaks. And he's like, Wendy, those peaks are so far away in this incredible mountain air that you don't realize how far they are. Well, he finally relented. And I said, look, if someone up, in our next village that we managed to find, I will ask. And if no one has heard of this place and no one gives us directions, we'll stop. Maybe. But in my mind, it was like, maybe. Actually, what I was doing was sort of cajoling Gary to get him to keep moving. That night, we enter this incredibly beautiful area that is very hard to describe. It's a series of pinnacles, large pinnacles that stretch way up to the clouds. And then there's the bottomland with this beautiful river running through it, grassy all around it. And then all these beautiful pinnacles, super steep, were terraced. But the people of Bolivia had completely forgotten what to do with terraces. There was nothing growing in them. It was so sad because all the young people had gone to La Paz to find work, when those were the ones that were sleeping in the streets with cardboard. And, the beauty was absolutely astounding. And Gary and I sort of camped on the side of this one pinnacle where we could see there was a village on top, and they would give us directions. They had to know because it was the last stopping point before these two twin peaks that were right in front of us. They were just blaring down on us. And we camped that night in our tent. And I was really having a hard time sleeping, very uncomfortable, cold, all that. But I did finally doze off, but was awoken by the sound of my daughter's voice. Mom! Mom! I was sitting bolt upright in my sleeping bag, shaking all over. Her voice was so real. And I was just torn to ribbons in that moment, just completely. And I thought, okay, I've got to stop. If we don't find directions at the top of this pinnacle, it's got to stop. We climbed all day. That thing was so steep. But at the top, oh my God, it was so beautiful. So, okay, it's like barely dawn by the time we reached the top of the pinnacle because we started very early. And we reached this quadrangle, right? Of course, there's nothing but foot traffic ever goes to this place. and the quadrangle and the adobe buildings. And it's like, why are people living up here? And absolutely not a soul, not a soul. And it's like, how are we going to ask anybody? And one by one, a person appears. And this one's when it gets so incredibly theatrical, because the sun was coming through the buildings in these great golden beams, and it's like when someone would come into the quadrangle, it was like they were spotlit by this Hollywood light right on them. And we'd ask each person, and then they'd walk off stage, and a new person would walk on stage, and it would have been funny, except I was taking it extremely seriously. So many people came through. No one had even begun to hear of what we were looking for. And Gary and I decided, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to go up to the very tippy point of this pinnacle and sit up there and decide what we're going to do. And so we did that. What we saw at the tippy top of this pinnacle was so amazing. Not only the huge snow-peaked mountains right in front of us, but if we look down, like the clouds were actually right at eye level, these little snow puffs of clouds tripping by right at eye level, and all the emerald green pinnacles all dotting the landscape, and the beautiful golden silver river twisting through. And I swear it was all these flute music kept sort of coming through in little spots. And I thought, it must be close. The monastery's got to be close with all this beauty. But Gary tried again. He said, Wendy, you have to understand. Gary had done quite a bit of mountaineering, thank God, because he said at that point, Wendy, it's going to take you at least an entire day to get to the space between the two mountains, the mountain pass. And just look, it's full of snow. You're not going to make it. It'll take us a day to get off this pinnacle, and another day, probably 2 days, to get to the top. And I really began to listen to reason. I sat for a moment and really listened to my body, which was totally exhausted, listened to my mind, which was as conflicted and as crazed as any mind can get, I think. And somehow, some way, in the midst of all of that, we decided to end the journey. And we slowly make our way down to the cemetery where we had left our backpacks. And I reluctantly get my backpack back on and start walking through these very narrow, dark, alleyways between buildings, and trying to make my way to the quadrangle again. And it's very dark. So as I'm entering the light of the quadrangle, I almost trip over a corpse, a dead body. So I've taken my backpack from the graveyard, and now right in front of me is a group of men carrying on a little stretcher a dead body, and I have to stop dead in order not to trip over him. And they pass by. The guy at the end starts making a little conversation. He goes, "Hi, what are you doing up here?" And I'm like totally at a loss for what to say in response to that. It's like, what am I doing up here? But I also understand metaphor. It's like, it was so clear to me in that moment that I was dead, that all of this reflection, the graveyard, the dead body, was me realizing that some part of me had completely died that day, that week, that month. And of course, what was dying or died was all my ideas of how I was supposed to get to God, if you will. All the ideas that had come from literature and religion, and I had suffered, I had sacrificed, I'd given everything, including my daughter, basically. And I was finding a dead end. And it was, I really cannot even explain what kind of mental state I was in. So we decided to start going down the mount, that amazing pinnacle, and there's actually a trail that we had not found before, and it's extremely steep and it's very precipitous. It's just very narrow, and on either side is a drop of 1,000, 2,000 feet, something like that. Very rocky and difficult. At one point, we stopped to rest, and this young man with this very old lady, and I'm thinking, my God, what is she doing, even trying to walk down this mountain? And we're all chatting, and the old lady does not cease chatting. She's just and then all of a sudden, choom, the young man walks off and leaves us with the old lady. And I'm like, oh my God, I can't leave her by herself. And so I start to take the old lady down the mountain. Gary goes ahead because he can't handle the fact that we're going at an inch every few seconds. I mean, we were going so slowly. It almost drove me insane. I wanted to be down. I wanted to be away. I wanted to see my daughter. I was like, but now, because my seeking had failed, I then quickly switched in my mind. Okay, service must be the way, the answer. I'm going to devote my life to service now. And this old lady accommodated me. She did not shut up the entire way. She was, and of course it was Quechua. I had no concept what she was talking about. And it took forever, all day, mincing along. And of course I had a lot of time to think on my way down. And I decided that, okay, the way was to go, to devote my life to service and to get back to my family, which I had been pretty estranged from for a number of years. And I would go back and make amends with them and begin to really be part of the family again and make family my whole focus. And so that was all the way down. By the time we got down to the bottom of the hill, Gary had actually traded his coat for a ticket on a seat on this bus that happened to be leaving that night. And we sat on the bus. It snowed that night. No windows in the bus. Sitting bolt upright on a bench all night. And my mind was so confused. Was I hearing God at all? That was the hardest part. I mean, we can make mistakes in life, but the biggest and hardest part for me was, guess what, girl? You're not hearing anything right. You have heard nothing. You've dragged Gary out here. You've left your daughter for what? You have completely failed as a spiritual aspirant. And no wonder you took a bus instead of a truck. You didn't wait for a dream. You didn't give all your apricots away. You know, on and on, my mind found all these reasons for why I had failed. And what's totally fascinating is how God got me out of the mess I was in my mind. And the next episode will be watching the different influences and the different guidance I was given to begin to sort out the massive confusion in my mind and to begin to come away from the idea that I had totally failed. It's a very miraculous session. And you really not begin to see, but you see how guidance works. You hear it. I heard it, and I'm not going to give it away, but it's really a fascinating ending to this story. So I hope you'll wait for the ending, because that is probably, well, it's not the best part, but it's so fascinating what the true meaning of this whole episode was and how I could reconcile, because until I really got all of that, I was suicidal. I was like, what's the point? I can't find my way out. I don't understand a thing. And I'm sure it's like most of the people on this earth right now feel that way. So next time we'll get it all sorted out. And that's it for today.
Want to hear more of the conversation? Sign up at bumpintheroad.us as a Bump 2 subscriber. Buy us a cup of coffee. You can give it a go for free. Just use the code FREEMONTH. And thank you for listening today. I hope you found something in today's podcast that inspires you along your own life's path, because sometimes a bump in the road is actually a portal into a more conscious and meaningful life.